The unsurpassed, profound, and wonderful Dharma is difficult to encounter in billions of aeons, and now see it here, receive it, and uphold it, about to fathom the Tathagata's true meaning, to liberate all sentient beings. Let's generate the supreme bodhicitta. Let us begin our class on the Surangama Sutra. In our previous class, we've already covered a few aspects of the 10 ways of seeing the nature of mind. So we've already talked about how the nature of seeing is mind. The nature of seeing does not move, does not extinct, does not get lost. And currently we're talking about the seeing does not return. Before the actual class, I would like to address today as a special day. Today is the World Reading Day or the World Book Day. The initiation started to commemorate a Spanish writer, a very famous and well-known writer whose name is Miguel de Cervantes. He passed away in 1616, April the 23rd. Also, Shakespeare passed away on the same date, except it's on the Julian calendar. So people would commemorate the passing of these two wonderful writers. On top of that, I heard that there's this special festival in Spain. A day to celebrate books because a princess was taken away, was abducted by a serpent, and then someone went to save her. After that, the princess gifted him a book, and this book as a symbol of courage. So by this kind of cause and condition, the UNESCO started to commemorate this special day, April 23rd, as the World's Book Day, to encourage people to read more books. I believe the audience over here would read books even if it's not World's Book Day. Let it be the sutras or the five treatises. Other than those practitioners who will only engage in meditation, I believe the majority of you spend your days and nights in reading books. So we don't necessarily need to celebrate this day, but it's just a day that is celebrated by people in the world. So let's get back to the actual sutra, the Surangama Sutra. Today we're continuing with the fifth aspect, which is seeing does not return. In the previous parts, we've already covered that the Buddha giving teachings to Ananda and the whole assembly. At that time, Ananda's mind is focused on the wonderful voice of the Buddha. However, that is not seeing the nature. That kind of focus is called dualistic mind. The Buddha then gave the example that the way Ananda focused his mind on the sound or the voice of the Buddha is just like when someone's pointing the finger to the moon, but the person who wants to see the moon doesn't look at the moon, but rather looking at the finger. Not only this person who wants to see the moon doesn't see the moon, he also lost the seeing of the finger because the finger is not luminous, and by mistakenly seeing the finger as the moon, it is losing both of the moon and the finger as the correct object. So, of course, If we were to pay attention and focus our attention to the sound of the Dharma teaching, for example, the voice of the Buddha, conventionally, this is really wonderful. This is listening attentively, that is of great merit. However, when we're listening to the teaching of Surangama Sutra, what's more important is to focus on the recognition of your own luminous mind or your own true mind. There is a difference between focus on the words and focus on the genuine meaning, which is seeing the nature of mind. Yesterday we talked about that. Let's continue with the sutra. Though I have to say that listening to someone like me who have not attained enlightenment is not as meaningful as listening to someone who had attained full enlightenment. If we were to only listen to this teaching by fathoming the content or the meaning of the teaching with our dualistic mind, I think it would be difficult. It's not as meaningful. However, we have to acknowledge that the blessings of the Buddha, the blessings of the sutras are definitely incredible. Therefore, simply studying it is still really good, really wonderful. After the 2,500 years of Buddha's parinirvana, if we have the opportunity, this auspicious coincidence to study the Dharma, this is indeed really wonderful. Surangama Sutra is such a profound sutra that used to be a national treasure that's guarded in India back then. Now there are various opportunities that came to the maturity so that we can study it, so that we can later propagate it. This sutra is indeed the treasure of a national treasure of spirituality, a supreme treasure, really. So sometimes, whenever we talk about such profound teachings inherited in this national treasure, it can be a little bit inappropriate. We could say that because it is too profound and too profound for me to expound it. I feel like I am simply a blind leading the blind, or simply a blind trying to lead the way. However, we can see it from another aspect. I'm simply a blind holding a lamp, trying to lead the way. And I think that's, in such a way, if we think about it in such a way, it is appropriate. Let us look at the example that's given by the Buddha today. Yesterday we talked about the pointing the finger at the moon example, and let's look at another example, the other example being the guest and the host. This example or this metaphor is also quite important because the whole content around this part all associated with this particular metaphor. So let's look at it. It says that it is like the guest who lodges overnight at an inn. There's a guest who's passing by and then staying at an inn. Nowadays, there are lots of terms to describe an inn. It could be an inn, a hotel, or a motel. And other kinds of lodges, hostel, and so on like that. In the past, it's called an inn, for example. So he stops temporarily over there and then goes on. He does not dwell there permanently. As a guest, since he's a guest, he doesn't stay for a long period of time. What does it refer to? What is the guest? What does the guest point to? It is the false mind, because it is temporary. And then in this metaphor, there is another person who is the innkeeper. Because the innkeeper does not go anywhere, therefore he is the host of the inn. The keeper or the host of the inn rarely goes anywhere because he is the owner of this inn. So who's this host, or what does this host point to? It is the true mind, our awareness. Likewise, if it is truly your mind, it does not go anywhere. Over here, it's exactly like that. What is exactly like that? The Buddha then told Ananda, the true mind of yours doesn't go anywhere, just like the host of the inn. To see the nature of your own mind from the nature of the mind's aspect, in fact, the nature of mind does not change. Ponzu Rinpoche also stated that, saying that, have you recognized the nature of your mind? When you observe the mind, that observation, that watcher is impermanent. However, the mind that knows is permanent in conventional saying. This is a similar way of expressing it. Because awareness is uncompounded. It's unconditioned. The watcher that sees this mind is impermanent. However, the mind itself is permanent. The luminous clarity aspect of this recognizing is without any change. And then the Buddha continued to say that, however, in the absence of sound, it has no discriminating nature of its own. Can you tell the reason why? In this particular sentence is a bit difficult to understand, but I think Master Chang Shui's explanation is quite clear. You can refer to the Master Chang Shui's commentary as well as Master O.E. and Master Han Shan's commentary. They're a bit difficult to understand because they're in Old Chinese. However, their explanation is more fitting to the original meaning of the sutra. Their way of explanation is saying that the false mind comes and goes along with the sound of the Buddha. When the Buddha's sound appears, then that false mind appears. When the sound extincts, then the false mind also extincts, or doesn't. The mind doesn't produce, or is not produced. Which means the true mind doesn't appear when the Buddha's voice is sound and doesn't appear when there is no sound. Because the true mind doesn't come and go, doesn't come to production or the cessation with the sound of Buddha's mind. We often say that the false mind comes to the production and the cessation. While it comes to production, it ceases. We often say that. So whenever we're listening to class, we're listening to a teaching, our mind makes a discrimination along with the sound. But if there is no sound of the teaching, then there is is no mind that goes with the teaching. Yesterday, during the after-class presentation, she sounds like she was observing her mind, and she said something like she was following along with the words, which is correct. Whenever we study the teachings, I think we have to look at our own mind, of observing how our mind works. When we listen to the Dharma teachings, we also do that. Whenever there's sound, our mind follows the sound to make discriminations. But after there's no sound, then there is no discrimination. In the morning when I woke up, I was contemplating while my eyes are still shut, and I couldn't quite understand what it means. But later, when I woke up and opened my eyes, after reading into it a few times, I think I gained some more understanding. The Surangama Sutra is indeed very difficult, even in Tibetan language. In the morning when I was having breakfast, I hosted 2 Khenpos there, and I asked them to read these particular parts and asked them if they understand. They read for a long period of time and then give me back my book and saying that they don't. But anyhow, I think I understood now. This is how it should be explained. To continue, over here, this then applied not only to the distinguishing of sound. In distinguishing my appearance, there is no distinction making nature apart from the mark of form. If there is the true mind, then the true mind doesn't follow the sound to arise and extinct. Do you understand that? Because let it be sound or no sound, at any time, the true mind, the luminous nature of it does not part from us. Whenever we listen to the sound, that mind that makes a discrimination is the distinguishing of sound mind. And whenever there's a form and we make that distinguishing discrimination, then that is a distinguishing of form mind or distinguishing of appearance mind. And that happens also relating to the other 5 kinds of objects, such as smell, taste, and touch. The Buddha then over there said that whenever you distinguish my appearance, my form, you also make that distinguishing thought. But the mind, the true mind, doesn't arise or cease because of the appearance or because of any of those. The true mind does not arise because there is an object that appears and ceases because the object ceases. It is of a constant the true mind is of consistency. It is always there. Thus, even when the making of distinctions is totally absent, when there is no form and no emptiness, which is similar to what we talked, which refers to the host that we talked earlier. It is without form and without emptiness. Without form, it shows that it is not of any of the external objects, such as form, sound, touch, smell, taste, and so on. Nor is it of emptiness. So it is no form and no emptiness. The obscurity which Goshali and the others make to be the profound truth. Goshali over here refers to one of the heretic practices or one of the heretic religion. That is Samkhya. Goshali is the founder of it. The Samkhya heretics they foolishly take that the 6 objects, including their mind consciousness, totaling 25 types of teachings or 25 types of objects as the truth. Therefore, whenever we talk about the Samkhya heretics, they would talk about the birth is existent and the constant self is existent. There are 25 of the considered constant existent things or objects. The translation, this particular Chinese translation, is a bit difficult to understand because there's not a lot of subjects used in the sentence structure. Maybe because of the cabinet founder when he was doing the proofreading and when he paid too much attention to the beauty of language, therefore the meaning somehow got a little bit lost and it's a bit difficult to understand nowadays, especially after so many years after it's been translated. The Tibetan version is also a bit difficult to understand. However, what it means over here is that this kind of true mind, which parts from all kinds of external conditions, such as all the sound, form, touch, smell, and taste. So the true mind is without any of the dualistic distinctions. And the sutra continued to say that how can we say that the nature of your mind plays the part of host, since everything perceived by it returns to something else? The nature of your mind in the Chinese translation doesn't necessarily refer to the true mind. In the Tibetan version, over here, it didn't use the true mind. It didn't use that term. Rather, it used the term just mind. Whether it is the false mind or the true mind, we have to use our wisdom to make that analysis. It says that this mind that grasps onto all the form, sound, touch, and the taste, if they grasp onto those kinds of things and then come back to it, which would come to extinction, and then would return back. How could you say this kind of mind is the host? Because host would stay at a place but would not go about. Now, the next part talks about the 8 types of illusion, which is quite important teaching in the Surangama Sutra. There are a few very important teachings in the Surangama Sutra. First one is the 10 ways of pointing out the nature of mind, and then the 8 illusions. Over here, it talks about if the mind comes to extinction, then that is not true mind. Master Changshui also said that the true mind is like the host, but the false mind is like the guest. If the mind has the illusory changes and extinctions, in that way, that mind definitely is not the host. Over here, Ananda said, if every state of our mind returns to something else as its cause, then why does the wonderful bright original mind mentioned by the Buddha return nowhere? Ananda, I think, he's quite humble. He said that I hold out the hope that the Buddha will shower us with such compassion as to enlighten us on this point. We can see that his attitude is quite humble and respectful. On one hand, we can see that he's not particularly the smartest among all the disciples, especially when it comes to the comparison to the Buddha's wisdom. On the other, we have to acknowledge that Ananda is very respectful to the Buddha, being the cousin of the Buddha. Usually, people, if the relatives of certain celebrities or some important people, they tend to be quite arrogant as their relatives. But over here, Ananda, he's quite respectful to the Buddha. Without the questions and requests by Ananda, I don't think we'll have the opportunity to receive such wonderful teachings. So we should be grateful to Ananda to pose these questions. Over here, he said that, well, when it comes to the mind mentioned by the Buddha, the kind of wonderful, bright, original mind, as you can see, all the adjectives used in front of mind are very different. Sometimes they are the wonderful, bright, original mind. Sometimes it's the true mind. Sometimes it's the bright mind, the luminous mind, or the clear mind. In different contexts, there are different ways of calling this mind. Over here, the Buddha, with his great compassion, could you please shower us with wisdom so that we can understand this mind that does not extinct? The Buddha then said to Ananda, as you now see me, the essence of your seeing is fundamentally bright. If the profound, brilliant, original mind is compared to the moon, the essence of your seeing is the second moon rather than its reflection. Over here, the Buddha said, well, you can see me now, right? But this seeing is called the seeing of essence of the fundamentally bright, which is not the most inferior seeing. However, it is not the most superior seeing either. It is not the profound, bright, original mind. Though it is not the most superior mind that is called the profound, bright, original mind. So his seeing is the essence of fundamentally bright. We can see this sounds very confusing, isn't it? Which one is inferior? Which one is more superior? It's very difficult to distinguish. But after that, let's look at the example or the metaphor. Over here, the Buddha said that this is the essence of your seeing, that is the essence of fundamentally bright, is not the most superior nor the most inferior. Rather, it is the middling type of seeing. And then the Buddha gives the metaphor saying that this is just like the second moon, not the reflection of the moon, nor the original moon. According to the beacon of certainty and the resting the mind at ease, where it talks about the water moon and then the moon in the sky. If we were to use that type of method to explain this, I think it would be easier to understand. The two types of moon corresponds to the two types of wisdom, that is the resembling wisdom and the true wisdom. So over here, Ananda, since his seeing is not the highest seeing, or his understanding of the true nature is not the highest, therefore it's not the true mind. However, his seeing is higher than the ordinary beings, therefore it is of the middling capacity. Now let's look at this example with the three. Let's look at this example correspond to the three moons. There's the first moon, the real moon that's in the sky, and then second moon is the moon that we see by squeezing our eyes. These two moons are really well known in Tibet. Everyone knows it. In the evening, after we have dinner, I would go out with my brother and sisters, and then we would look into the sky and we would ask each other, how many moons do you see? And then we would squeeze our eyes and try to see more moons. At that time, outside of our tent, there are lots of yaks, and we would lie in between the herds of yaks and look into the space. Especially on the 15th of every month in the lunar calendar, the moon would look really beautiful and bright and round. So we would keep looking into the sky. Of course, we're not really looking into our mind, but we would just get very curious about the two moons. So we would just squeeze our eyes, and then we would just count the moons over there. And after we let go of our pressure on the eyes, then the fake moon would slowly merge into the real moon. Everyone would just get very curious, and we would lie there and count the stars, and we couldn't even count to the boundless and endless stars. But nowadays, I think children don't have that opportunity anymore. Another story related to yaks is because yaks, they can ruminate, but we can't. So whenever we eat tsampa, we would swallow tsampa, and then we would ask our parents, why can't we take out the tsampa that we just ate like the yaks? Anyhow, let's get back to the example of the two moons. When we were young, we heard this kind of expression of two moons very often, but we don't really understand. Now, let's look at this example of the three moons. The first one is the moon in the sky, and the second one is by pressing your eyes, by pressuring into your eyes, then you would see the two moons. And then the third moon is the moon that's reflected in a water-filled container. Over here, Ananda sees the appearance of the Buddha, which is similar to the second type of moon. The first type of moon is the actual moon. So over here refers to the seeing of the first blooming bodhisattvas who can see the true moon in the sky without any elaborations. The second type of moon is similar to when we study Mahayana, where we talk about though as mundane beings, when we look into the nature of our mind, we can see the nature of our mind in a generalized way, in a vague way, which is similar to Ananda's seeing. For example, when we practice ati, whenever we receive the pointing out instructions from the guru, and we generally understand, we have a kind of a picture of the minds coming and going. But the direct pointing out is still quite cannot change your realization completely, but you understand some part of it. However, the mundane beings, they have no idea of what you can see. Therefore, this is similar to the explanation to the Zen Buddhism. I think it's quite fitting that when you see the moon, in fact, it's the moon that's similar to when you squeeze your eyes and you see the second moon. It's still a little bit far from seeing the actual moon. And then the moon that's reflected in a water container on the surface, that is full of elaborations. So we definitely, our level of realization is not that dualistic, false reflection of the moon. But we are more closer to see the real moon. However, there is still the apprehending and apprehended, the dualistic conception of us. Therefore, we still have not fully reached the truth yet. When we study Surangama Sutra, some people probably would be able to attain realization. And sometimes the gurus would say, oh, this person had attained realization. But this kind of attainment of realization doesn't mean that this person had attained the first, second, or third bhumi, or the fully enlightened Buddhahood. It is most likely not, because these kinds of people who attain certain level of realization, they still have to continuously to study and then according to the Madhyamika where it says that the first Bhumi Bodhisattvas would attain tens of hundreds of merits, and the second Bhumi Bodhisattva would have the attainment of tens of thousands of merits, and their levels of realization could lead them to see hundreds of Buddhas, hundreds of worlds, and and they would be able to mature the hundreds of sentient beings at one single moment. Without this kind of merit, you cannot say that you have attained that full realization. Therefore, if you were to think that, oh, I have attained full realization, then you should really look into yourself and compare your merit, your spiritual qualities to that stated in the Sutra of the 10 Bhumis. If it's not there yet, and then you claim yourself to be so, that is quite laughable. Anyhow, over here, the so-called enlightenment, the so-called realization over here refers to seeing the nature. Seeing the nature of mind is not the highest yet. This kind of seeing, this kind of realization is probably still the one who sees the two moons. But is it a little, people may say that, oh, but that's too low of a realization. That is not true either. Just like you have already seen the two moons, and then if you let go of your hand slowly and slowly, you will eventually be able to see the true mind. So you're on the way there. I think particularly over here, this is a good way to explain it. I know that the Chan masters of the past didn't really explain it in such a way, but I think it would be more useful and beneficial if we can combine the Sutrayana and Vajrayana teachings over here together to explain it. Now, the next part, the Buddha continued to say that you should listen attentively, for I am now going to show you the place of no returning. I'm going to teach you what it means by the place of no returning. From this part onward, the Buddha will expound on the 8 types of illusory qualities to demonstrate that all dharmas are without any intrinsic existence. There is no intrinsically existent characteristics to the phenomena. The 8 types of illusions, they would eventually extinct. So these are the 2 aspects of teaching. Ananda, this great lecture hall is open to the east. For example, now we're sitting in this large shrine hall, and then this shrine hall is open to the east. It is flooded with light when the sun arises in the sky. So this particular sign is the sign of brightness. So first of all, we're going to look at all the different kinds of characteristics or signs, and then we're going to further look at the 8 types of extinctions. It is dark at midnight during a new moon or when they obscured by clouds or fog. This is the sign of darkness, which talks about in the mid of night when there's no moon, and then when there are clouds, there are fog, that's blocking the light. Therefore, that's a sign of darkness. The first one is a sign of brightness, the second one is of darkness. On top of during a new moon where there's no moon at all, and then there's dark clouds and then even fog, so it's completely pitch dark. The next sign is looking out through open doors and windows. Your vision is unimpeded. Whenever you can look through, then that's a sign that's a sign of looking thoroughly. facing walls or houses, your vision is hindered.
色是吧？我读的不行啊。就是说这个，比如说我们的这个墙壁啊，就是或者说是与物之间呢，就是这个
When there are
与物之间
walls
没有
or
任何
there
的
are
这个
different
这种
obstacles or different things that's blocking in between
就直接这个不是无碍的嘛，就是有
various
阻碍
kinds of
的
blockage.
那么这个呢，如果你去干的话，那就肯定是这个读者的了，就是
This is a sign
晒在里面
of
就不可能
the
的，
vision
就直接
being
通
hindered.
过去啊，就是这个叫做晒，就刚才叫做痛相，就是这个叫做晒相啊，就是
The previous one
读晒的
being
晒
looking through, and the second one
然后
being
这个分别之处，则
the
乎
visions hindered.
见愿
The visions
如果
being
我们这
hindered.
个去分别的话，那外面就是各种什么色三香味触啊，
Your vision
五尘六
is
尘啊，就是这
causally
些。那么这些呢，就是
conditioned
你
in
所见
such
的这个愿，
places
这个叫做
where there are
右相
forms
也可
of
以
distinctive
或者呢，就
features.
是对应该叫什么？这个应该是右相还是什么？就是愿相就是什么？然后
This is a sign of
然后呢，就是
conditioned.
这里这个完虚这种片是虚空，就是
And
那我
then
们的这个
in
空间就是这个
dull
这个
void,
空间，就是这个弯曲的
in
话呢，就
this
是这个虚空，就是虚空当中的话呢，
space
便是这个没有什么的，就是这个叫做是这个
where
空
you can see
就是空
nothing.
那么这
This
个
is
叫
a
做
sign
空
of
相，刚
emptiness.
才是右相和这个是空相。
So the previous one is the sign of conditioned, or there's a conditioned existence. The second one is emptiness.
如果是
The next one is your vision will be distorted when the objects of seeing are shrouded in dust and vapor. Whenever there are dusts and vapor and all kinds of ashes that's been blown up, this is the kind of dusty sign. It could be the sun haze, it could be dust and ashes, or because of the great wind, or for example, right now, where the war is, where there is war, there are lots of darkness and clouds because of the bombs. That's the sign of ashes or being distorted in dust. The next one is that you will perceive clearly when the air is fresh. So this is the sign of cleanness.
所以呢，刚才这个明和暗。
Now, all the 8 types of signs, the signs of brightness, of darkness, of conditioned existence, of emptiness, of looking thoroughly through, as well as being impeded by blockage. On top of that, there is then signs of cleanness and the signs of dust. Of course, there are lots more of the opposite kinds of signs, but the Buddha specifically gives this 8 types of signs. Because these signs are the dualistic graspings that people usually hold on to. And the Buddha gives the teachings based on these kinds of graspings. By pointing out all of these so-called opposite signs, they would extinct, or they would simply disappear into their own nature. And then the Buddha continued to say that Ananda, observe all these transitory characteristics as I now turn each to its place of origin. What are the basic origin? Ananda, among all these transitions, the light returns to the sun. Why? Without the sun, there is no light. Therefore, the reason for light belongs with the sun, and so it can be returned to the sun. Previously, we talked about light and dark. If we were to return the light to the sun,
就像我们这个有时候玩这个电子游戏，就是什么这个电子游戏的时候，你出现很多军队，就是然后陈修很多。
This is such an interesting example, and it's quite fascinating. Nowadays, lots of people would play video games, and all of a sudden you see these armies of the video game participants, and then they would later can merge into one little thing, which is similar to the generation stage of practice. They first would practice, visualize a manjushri from the single dot or from the seed syllable, and then later they would vanish into space. So this is also kind of a game. Similarly, the worldly signs are like that. The worldly characteristics are like that. The light can disappear, or the light can be retracted to the sun. This is called returning to the sun. Darkness returns to the new moon, and penetration returns to the doors and windows, while obstruction returns to the walls and caves. Conditions return to distinctions, emptiness returns to dull emptiness, darkness and distortion return to the mist and haze, bright purity returns to freshness, and nothing that exists in this world goes beyond these kinds. According to Prajnaparamita Sutra, it says that the form is emptiness, emptiness is form, form is no other than emptiness, emptiness is no other than form. Therefore, darkness or brightness or penetration versus blockage, all of these kinds of characteristics, they can all return to its nature. Because all of these characteristics, they're simply the dualistic conception that we habitually set up for ourselves. We can say that. And then the Buddha said that, and nothing that exists in this world goes beyond these kinds. The 8 kinds of characteristics and the 8 kinds of returnings can include everything, all phenomena in this world. According to Bodhisattva Charyavatara, where it says that when the causes and conditions mature, then you would be able to see all kinds of things. Without causes, then you would not be able to see them. So when the causes and conditions mature, then we will be able to perceive everything. Similarly, when the causes and conditions are met for the brightness to manifest, then there is brightness. But the causes and conditions are also not intrinsically existent. According to the memorandum of the preliminary practices, it also talks quite in detail and in depth about how everything derived from causes and conditions. Everything derived from causes and conditions, and everything ceases because of causes and conditions as well. According to Madhyamika Avatara, it says that in all phenomena, there is not even one phenomena that did not derive from causes and conditions. Out of all, there is not one that is not a phenomena derived from emptiness. And then the Buddha continued to say that to which of the 8 states of perception will the essence of your seeing return? The Buddha over here asked, well, the essence of your seeing, which means the apprehender. And then the Buddha asked, and then the bright nature, which is the apprehended, how could they return? To which they would return? From the perspective of making observation of a mind, the Buddha then guided Ananda to make this observation. The Buddha continued to question, saying that, why do I ask? The answer lies in the fact that if it is returned to brightness, you will not see darkness when there is no light. There are people who, for example, who were born blind, then at the time when there is no brightness, they shouldn't be able to see darkness. So the true seeing In fact, it doesn't have the return. And then the Buddha said that you will not see darkness when there is no light, although such states of perception as light, darkness, and the like differ from one another. Your seeing remains unchanged. There is not a change in the nature of seeing. Yes, there are changes in terms of the object of seeing, but the nature of seeing, in fact, doesn't have any change. That which can be returned to other sources is clearly not you. Well, if that which can be returned to other sources but not to you, then it is clearly not to you. That which can be returned nowhere is none other than you, according to the Sixth Patriarch's Sutra, where it says that if this is not your nature of mind, then whose nature of mind it is? I think that's a criteria whenever you look at your own mind and wonder if you have attained realization. On one hand, you could ask your fellow practitioners or your guru. Yes, you could ask for confirmation in such a way. Or sometimes whenever you read into the sutras, whenever you read into these teachings, and then you would reflect upon yourself and see the thing that you recognized. Is it arising at the same time it ceases? Is it appears and sometimes it doesn't appear? Or is it clear? Sometimes it isn't clear. Just as many people would feel that they have attained full realization when they're sitting in the shrine hall, but after a while, when they encounter certain conflicts from other people, they completely lose that realization. Then is it really your nature of mind? Longchenpa, in the Treasury of Dhammadhatu, he talked about when you're projecting, and throughout that projecting dualistic mind, recognize the clarity or the naked awareness itself. At that time, if you can maintain in that state of awareness and after you recognize it, if it follows you at all times, then you will not be turned around or influenced by the mundane mindset, or feel a sense of loss and gain because of the production and cessation. It won't happen like such. Therefore, it is definitely that we have to look at the nature of mind to recognize this mind. Without recognizing it, we could use the temporary ways of taming it, such as listening and contemplating on the Sutra and Shastra, or using the methods of practicing virtuous deeds to tame your mind temporarily. This is good, but when the causes and conditions are matured, if you haven't uprooted this foundation yet, then these causes and conditions will eventually come to fruition. Therefore, as a practitioner, we have to use all of our power to eradicate our self-grasping, self-cherishing mind. From the Madhyamika's point of view, all the powers should be placed at the essential point of eradicating self-cherishing mind. Vajrayana teaching, as well as the Zen practice point of view, we have to use all the power to recognize your nature of your mind. We all have this mind, in fact. If you just look slightly inwardly, I'm sure you've seen it. But what is this mind like? Sometimes you will see a false mind. But then, what's the nature of this false mind? Whenever you make the observation at the time of having a false mind, you would notice, oh, I am grasping into that state of mind which is a false mind. And under the power of that false mind, mind, I've been enslaved by this false mind. However, if I can recognize the nature of this false mind, then the false mind itself is the true mind. And then you'll be able to recognize that nature of mind right away. And this all kinds of defilements such as anger or greed or ignorance embedded in our mind stream, they can all be destroyed. The more I think about it, the more I make this observation, I would notice that, and I think to myself, if more and more sentient beings could see the nature of their mind, all of the ignorance and all of the afflictions, the 3 poisons, the 5 poisons, we will definitely be able to eradicate them. Look at people in this world, the countries that's having war and having lots of killings because of that anger, that aggression, or the destruction in this world because of greed, because of the sense of possession, let it be possession of wealth or possession of land. In human beings, there are people who have lots of power. There are people, by using their power, they brought forth great amount of pain, great amount of suffering upon the others. But if we can have people who have such a strong power of compassion, of the awakened heart, then countless people's mind can be changed in this world as well. This is my genuine feeling myself. And this is not just a theory. When we look at the Buddhist teachings, let it be the teachings on the 3 poisons or on the bodhicitta, in fact, they're also vivid in this world. They manifest the different power. It could be the power of negative emotions. And this kind of negative emotions could bring forth the great danger and great harm to the sentient beings. And what kind of harm could it bring to sentient beings? Make that observation. Or what kind of positive power and positive courage that the compassion or bodhicitta could bring forth to the sentient beings. I think as a practitioner, we have to make those observations. The teachings that's taught by the Buddha, we don't need to expound to the others. By making the emphasis by saying, oh, this is definitely true, this is really wonderful, but we should look into ourselves. And then you would know that we are so fortunate to receive teachings like such. We have such a great merits. So over here, the Buddha said that, therefore, I know that your mind is fundamentally wonderful, bright, and pure. This is definitely a teaching that can be explained from the angle of Mahayana. So it says that now this is the mind that you can see. This is wonderful, this is bright, and this is pure. This is the mind. This is the mind that's recognized by the Buddha. But the sentient beings are not like that. The sentient beings are, you yourself are confused and deluded. You miss what is fundamental, and you are caught in the turning wheel of the sixth path, tossing and floating on the stormy waves of birth and death at all times. For the sentient beings, when it comes to the brightness and darkness, on one hand, you can say that it's very easy to recognize. On the other,
对，就是就一直就是最后呢，就是
When the sentient beings have parted from the nature of their mind, then they would be taking turns and tossing and floating in the stormy waves of samsara. Therefore, the Buddha over here, with great compassion and pity, he said to Ananda, saying, "No wonder the thus come one says that you are the most pitiable of creatures, because we have no idea that we have this Buddha nature. The sentient beings have no idea. That's why the sentient beings are so pitiable." Now we've completed the 5 out of the 10 seeing of the nature. Next one will cover the 6th one, which is seeing is the seeing does not intermingle. So let's stop here today.
Zhibun Zulin Zhuwa